The hits keep coming from President Trump while on the final leg of his first international trip. The target of his latest, well, some are calling it an insult, Germany and its auto industry. Mr. Trump saying that the country was, quote, very bad on trade, citing the millions of cars they're selling in the U.S. as an issue. Will his comments come to hurt him during the two-day G7 summit, where there's already a deep divide between President Trump and the other nations on trade? We bring in former U.S. Commerce Secretary and Albright Stonebridge Group Chair Carlos Gutierrez on what you're watching most closely in President Trump's meetings. And thank you for joining us exclusively, because everybody wants to hear from you. You struck many a deal. President Trump's desire to make a fairer landscape, it doesn't tamp down if people want to buy VW cars.
Well, that's the problem is, how much of it is real tariffs, how much of it is non-tariff barriers, and how much of it is just good competition. We can't negotiate a market share. We've got to look at what is a non-tariff barrier and whether there are some games being played. But at the end of the day, what we want is the ability to compete. And yes, Germany has a trade surplus. They're a big manufacturing nation. Very big on engineering, and they're doing very well. But we've got to be careful with saying that anyone who's got a surplus must be cheating, because someone has to have a surplus here. Not everyone's going to be flat. Yeah.
And the quality. People always say that the quality of certain German vehicles is really top-notch. So, of course, a free consumer is going to go to that quality. But is there, from your expert eye, having been a commerce, an unfair advantage that some of these countries have simply because they tax our products while we're sending them to those countries, and yet we don't really hit too many tariffs? I know President Obama started slapping down major steel tariffs to keep it fairer, but not on everything.
Yeah, there's no question. We're the most open nation in the world, so we have very low tariffs. Maybe
do we need to change that?
I don't think so. I think what we have to do is continue to promote trade elsewhere and continue to promote that others take their tariffs down. If you just take NAFTA out, which is 25 years old, and look at all of the other free trade agreements that we have a surplus. So we do very well where we have free trade agreements. So if we don't like the way something is working with a country, the best way to do it is to get it on paper, to agree to something, to agree to rules, and that's what a free trade agreement is for. Japan
is a G7 nation. You just got back from there. What are you seeing as it pertains to trade? Donald Trump pulled us out of the TPP, said we're not going to be part of it. Japan forging ahead, and with whom are they linking up?
Yeah, it's a great question, because this is a very strategic moment. The Japanese economy, by the way, is doing better. And there's a sense of confidence that things are beginning to turn around. So the choice that they've made, that Japan appears to have made, based on the APEC meeting in Hanoi, is to go ahead and do a TPP 11, which is essentially TPP without the U.S.
I see.
I think that's a very good idea. And what that will do, because TPP is a very high standard trade agreement, that will raise the standard of trade agreements in Asia before the RCEP comes in, which is where China plays a role. And that's a very low standard. So this is a moment to define where we want the standards in Asia and the type of leadership role that Japan could play. So I just hope we recognize that moment and not insist that we have a bilateral agreement with Japan at the expense of TPP.
Everybody talks about how China is going to fill the void that perhaps the United States left, but they can't see everything that Donald Trump sees. Donald Trump brought Xi Jinping to Mar-a-Lago, not to Washington, D.C. He had a much more casual and interesting dinner atmosphere, perhaps. Looks like he knew exactly what he was doing, because shortly thereafter there were deals struck where they are going to allow more of our beef there. They are going to sell more of their chicken, although some of our viewers flipped out about that and called it sick chicken because there have been problems in the past. But let's just say going forward they'll have better regulation, maybe. But it appears that a lot of the saber-rattling and the tough rhetoric about China has been simply dissipated and dropped by President Trump. It's a good thing, right?
I think it was a great meeting, and it was interesting that the expectations were very low, and I think they were right to be low, because the purpose of the meeting is to establish a relationship, a working relationship between the two men, and maybe even a personal relationship, which is what they did. So you're right. After that, I think President Trump realized the linkage between China's role in North Korea, U.S. interest, and how we could be blurring the lines between trade and national security, which is always very tricky. So I think it was a very good meeting, and it's interesting that when they both talk about each other, they do so with respect. So I would say that both Prime Minister Abe's meeting, President Xi's meeting were very good, but now we have to think about what kind of an Asia do we want to see and think strategically about the next step. Well, that's the important thing.
You were former Kellogg CEO, and you know how I love red berries, and now my daughter loves
right.
Kellogg's Special K red berries. So that's your legacy for me. Thank you, Carlos. It's good
Thank you. Good to see you, Liz.
Carlos Gutierrez, former Secretary of Commerce.